from 1961 to 2001, we're talking about only 40 years passing.
Yeah.
Exactly 40 years. And people thought to themselves, okay, well, that's odd. They were going to do this in 1961, and here in 2001, there is actually a terrorist attack with hijacked airplanes in which many Americans die, and this justified war against Afghanistan, but also against Iraq.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, so that's the idea, right? Like, is that people, they began to think to themselves, okay, well, this is crazy. Like, what can I believe now? The U.S. government is capable of doing anything.
Yeah.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد الإمام المهدينا وسلم تسليما السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. My dear sister and companion Tiffany.
Walaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, dear father.
Inshallah, you're doing well.
Thank you so much. I'm doing great today. How are you doing?
I'm doing good. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me.
God bless you. So today we want to talk about a virtue. It's the virtue of truth, right? Versus lies. And being a truthful person versus being a liar. I think that's appropriate. And also maybe a lot of people don't know that my kunya that I have it's Abu Sadiq. Abu Sadiq means the father of the truthful.
Yes.
And the kunya, what a kunya is a kunya is kind of like a title or a nickname that is given to an individual when he gets closer to the cave or gets closer to being secure, so to speak, in his faith, or that he reaches a certain rank with the Imam of his time. And so when I reached a particular rank with the Imam of my time, Ahmed al-Hassan alayhi salam, I was given this kunya, and the kunya is Abu Sadiq, the father of the truthful. So truth has always been something that was played a big part in my life and was important to me, and is perhaps arguably the most important virtue that there is out there.
Yes.
So before we get into that, let's give our viewers a little bit more of an insight or personal history of you and I. Yeah.
Okay.
So your name is Tiffany Oldani.
Yes.
Yeah. And what country are you a citizen of?
The United States.
Okay. So you're an American citizen.
Yep.
And when did your family move to America?
You mean how far back?
Yeah.
At least a couple of generations back. My father's parents were my father's mother, she was like a first generation American. My father's father was, I think, second generation. So yeah, relatively recent, Americans. Going back to like the 1800s.
1800s? Okay. Well, the U.S. is a relatively new, recent, young country. It actually hasn't been on the world stage for a long time. I mean, the continent itself was there, for a long time, but the country itself is only how long? How old is it?
Like 300 plus years.
Exactly. It's only a couple hundred years old. I too am an American citizen, actually, and I was born in the United States. One of my parents, my mother, is a U.S. citizen. She was also born in the United States. And our family are U.S. citizens from the very beginning, actually. We can trace our lineage to even before the independence of the United States from the British Empire.
So the 1700s, you guys are going back
actually the 1600s.
The 1600s, wow.
Yes, I have ancestors that fought in the War of Independence. I have ancestors that fought in the American-Spanish Wars and the American-Mexican Wars. I have ancestors that participated in World War I and World War II. And so we come from a long lineage, a long line of natural-born U.S. citizens that lived, believed in the American ideals, and fought for the country of the United States. So really, arguably, I'm more American than you are, and then probably a lot of Americans that are out there today. Actually, a lot of Americans that exist today, they are, the vast majority probably of them don't go back as far as I do in terms of their family history.
Yeah, that's absolutely true.
Yeah. So I say that as a precursor because we've got a lot to say today. We're going to talk about, we're going to touch up a little bit on the topic of America itself.
Okay.
So, Tiffany, there's this narration, and it's a narration from the Prince of the Believers, Amir al-Mu'mineen, Ali ibn Abi Talib, alayhi salam. He says that the punishment of the liar in this world is that he's not believed even in his own truths.
Wow.
Or even when he's telling the truth.
Okay.
Okay? So Ahmed Hassan, he said before that a believer can be anything, but he can't be a liar. So a believer can be a murderer. What does that mean? That means that a person who's a believer maybe lose his temper, engage in a heated argument, end up committing an act of violence in a moment, and then right after that moment, he regret it because faith returns back to him. He was a believer, he loses his temper, he commits a horrible act, he murders somebody, and then faith comes back to him. He gets, he wakes to his senses and he regrets. So a believer can commit murder and remain a believer. A believer can commit fornication or adultery in a moment of lust. So a believer also could, be a practicing believer, and then momentarily his bodily lusts, his emotions overtake him, his desires overtake him, he commits a mistake, and right after he commits this act of fornication or act of adultery, he regrets it because he's a believer and faith gets back to him. But the one thing that you cannot be while being a believer is to be a liar. It's not possible. Imam Ahmed al-Hassan says. Because a liar by nature this is something that is premeditated. The liar, while he's lying, knows that he's lying. He doesn't care that he's lying. He doesn't think that he will be exposed in his lies. And he doesn't care, to be honest, about the pain and the suffering that he might cause other people.
Okay.
And he definitely is not a believer in the unseen, a believer that God hears and sees. He's not a believer in the presence of God. He's not a believer in a God, period.
Wow.
Okay?
Yeah, but it makes sense.
Even if his tongue professes faith.
Okay.
Okay? So the liar, he has the punishment of the hereafter. And that is a deep topic that we, have to talk about on another day. And that punishment is severe, depending on the types of lies that he, told. But he also is cursed to endure a punishment in this world. And the punishment that he endures in this world is that he's exposed at some time, right? At some point. And that's why you have many sayings that go along the lines that lies don't have legs, meaning lies are not going to travel so far. You can't get away with your lies, right? Eventually a lie will be exposed. We have narrations from the prophets and the messengers that say things to the effect of this. Like Jesus, alayhi when he said, all things that are done in the dark must be exposed in the light or come to light at some point. And so the liar's lies will always become exposed one day.
Yeah.
And when they do become exposed, that liar has to endure the punishment, right, of his lies. And that is that he will not be believed in anything, not in his lies, nor when he's telling the truth. So it's kind of like the hadith is basically a summary of the story of the boy who cried wolf, right?
Exactly, yeah.
Why don't you tell everybody the story of the boy who cried wolf?
Oh, it's pretty much exactly what the title states. There's a boy who was saying, there's a wolf, and he was tricking people, and people came running, and then he said it so many times that eventually when a wolf actually did come and he said, there's a wolf, nobody came anymore because nobody believed him.
Exactly. And so the liar, his punishment is to be like that boy who cried wolf. He cried wolf too many times, and the village people, they believed him and they came to save him, and then eventually they didn't believe him anymore because they saw that he was making a fool out of them. But then in the end, he's the one who ended up being the fool because he got swallowed by the wolf because nobody came to save him.
Yeah, that's
right?
Very karmically just. Yeah.
Exactly. And so I think that America on the world stage right now is suffering. I think it's suffering the result of this karmic justice, as you put it. America, unfortunately, it used to be something great. It used to be something that the whole world respected and wanted to, and looked up to. Mm-hmm. Everybody wanted to go to America. Yeah. And the whole world was influenced by American culture. They loved the American cartoons, the Saturday morning cartoons. They loved American movies that were made in Hollywood. They loved the American sports and entertainment that they exported all around the world, like the wrestling or the basketball, football, all these things. People loved the freedoms and the ideals that were said to be upheld by the United States, and that, the United States appeared to the world as kind of like a superhero that would come and save the day when people were in need. It was that force of goodness. Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah, of course. I mean, on the Statue of Liberty, it's written, like, give me you're poor, give me you're tired, give me you're hungry. It's seen as like this land of promise and opportunity that's open to all, and everyone is prosperous in America. That's sort of the image that was projected throughout history.
A land of freedom in which its arms were open to everybody. And people literally died, and they continued to die over the course of the 300 years to reach American soil and take part in the American dream. And it was the first time that a country, I'm not going to say it was the first time that a country was built upon the backs of refugees, because that's happened before, but it was kind of modeled after Rome. And Rome, you know the story of Rome, Romulus and Remus, they want to end up establishing a country. Romulus in particular, he ends up, settling on a plot of land, which is Rome, and he ends up wanting to fill it up with citizens. So he opens the door to all of the fugitives and all of the passerbys and all of the poor people and all of the people that are in need. And so America kind of did the same thing. It was built upon these Roman ideals that it would build its country, out of all of the people that felt like they were left out or they were escaping the injustices of their own countries.
Wow. That's very interesting. It's like a repeat of the Roman ideals in modern times.
Exactly, it was. It was definitely so. And everybody obeyed America, and everybody saw that America was this eagle, as they put on their great seal, that kind of would fly in from the sky, from the heavens, like an angel. Be carrying, weapons to defend the people that are in need, or the weak, and it would be carrying, food in its other claw in order to feed those who are in need. And America projected itself like that as a superhero. Yes. And they literally did that. They made a character called Captain America. That they propagated his story and his comics to the world and his movies, so that in the minds of the children all around the world, that America as a country was embodied in this kind of superhero that, defended, the just and fought against the unjust. But then something happened, unfortunately, and that is that America, especially, around the year 1999 to 2000, 2001, all around that time period, all the way leading up to 2003, you have this kind of breaking of trust of the American people and the rest of the world. The rest of the world began to doubt America. Yeah. They realized that not every time that America cries wolf, that there actually is a wolf. They realized that America actually, this boy that kept saying, there's a wolf, and rallying the rest of the world to its cause, the rest of the world realized that actually this boy that's crying is not a boy at all. It's a little wolf. It's actually a big wolf posing as a boy. A very big, dangerous wolf with big metallic fangs that is seeking to destroy and stomp over the rest of the nations on the earth. It's actually a very big beast, a beast that's mentioned in the book of Daniel. It's a monster. That's what they began to realize. And why did they begin to realize that, or state that, or formulate their opinion that America is as such? I think it had to do a lot with the events that took place, where the president of the United States, Bill Clinton at the time, he had an affair, and then they asked him about it. He lied about it. He said, I never slept with that woman, and he denied it. But then they found out that actually he was lying. Mm-hmm. And then that was the very first time where the American people, their hearts was really broken with their president, and this drama unfolded on the world stage. And it was like a great embarrassment to the world, because America was kind of projecting itself also as like this Christian nation, and this was very unchristian. It was a very unchristian-like thing to do. And so that shocked the world, it shocked the people at home, and it shocked the people abroad. And they kind of came to the realization that actually your president can lie to you.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember those events actually vividly. I was about 9 years old when that happened, and I was, living in Texas. And I remember it being a big shock, and it was everywhere on the news. And yeah, it was a big break of trust, actually.
It was a big break of trust. And then right afterwards, the people gravitated towards the more conservative candidate, the wholesome, natural country boy, George Bush, all right? And a lot of people thought that the reason why George Bush won was because of the fact that he was seen as more of a Christian, wholesome, family guy, truthful, honest, Republican, Texan, right? You're from Texas.
Yes, yeah. And he was very popular. He was actually the governor of Texas at the time.
Yeah? Did your parents love him?
Yeah, they did. Yeah.
And so he was very popular. Mm-hmm. He was very funny. Was he funny at the time?
I don't think that people, there was, of course, a time in history where people, began to laugh at the things that he said, but I don't know that it had happened yet. But he was seen as this Christian family man, lovable. People had been aware of him because his father had been president before. He was seen as like a return to the Christian values of America, I would say.
Yeah. So then he gets elected president. And then not too far into his presidency, 9/11 happens.
Yes.
And then all of a sudden the United States is attacked. It's attacked by terrorists, Al-Qaeda, and the United States is shocked. The entire country comes to a standstill. You remember that?
Yes, of course.
Where were you at during that time?
I was in Egypt, actually.
You were in Egypt. I was in America when that happened, and it was a very big shock to the public to see on television these planes flying into the towers and then into the Pentagon, and all these buildings collapsing and all these people dying, over 3,000 people. And I think it was a very big shock to the rest of the world. And everybody knew that something big was coming.
For sure.
This is not going to end easily. It was like somebody had awakened the great dragon or the great beast, and now everybody knew that this was going to end up leading to a war. And that's exactly what happened. George Bush, right afterwards, he declares a war against the Taliban, and he ends up bombing Afghanistan and invading Afghanistan. And shortly after that, about a year and a half after that, he invades Iraq. And they end up building and making the case that Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction, and they managed to convince the American public that Saddam was a brutal dictator that was funding terrorism and posed a threat to the United States, and possibly there was something that he had to do with 9/11, and that he had all these weapons that were hidden out in the desert, and there was, you remember, and then
weapons of mass destruction.
Weapons of mass destruction, whatever that meant, like whether it was nuclear weapons or chemical weapons or whatever it was. But they asserted that that was the case, and then you had the American generals coming forward, the heads of the Army and the Navy, and you had the heads of intelligence coming forward, the NSA, the CIA, and they were all basically confirming that there were weapons of mass destruction and that Saddam Hussein posed a threat against the world. And so they went to war, and they killed over 1 million Iraqis.
In the name of freedom.
In the name of freedom. And in the name of defending the United States and defending its citizens. And all the meanwhile, like, people, for the most part, were supporting the world, and the Americans at home were supporting the United States. But there was this kind of air of suspicion. There were people that kind of questioned it, and that sentiment of questioning the United States and its motives and its evidence and its truthfulness began to increase little by little. Especially it exploded when the Americans actually successfully, obviously, invaded Iraq, and took down Saddam Hussein's administration within a matter of hours. And then they're controlling the country now, but they're unable to bring forward any evidence that there ever was any weapons of mass destruction. In fact, there ends up being no weapons of mass destruction at all. And so people thought to themselves, how is it the case that the most powerful country in the world did not know or got that bad of intelligence to actually believe and propagate in front of the entire world and kill 1 million people, and they didn't know that there wasn't weapons there? How is that the case? So then they began to think to themselves, actually, maybe they did know. Maybe they lied to the American public. Maybe they lied that there was weapons of mass destruction in order to invade Iraq, to control its oil. Maybe it was for monetary purposes. Maybe there was another agenda that was at play. And so the trust in the United States began to become shaky after that. And then you had these documents that were released to the public, and it was classified documents that became declassified and it basically told the tale. And now during this time also we have to keep in mind that the internet is exploding, right?
Yeah.
More and more people are joining the internet. I mean, back in 1999, YouTube didn't exist. 2000, 2001, YouTube didn't exist. There was no such thing as YouTube. YouTube, I think, is something which started in around 2004, 2005, something like this, right?
Yeah.
So this is pre-YouTube. The people are not consuming the internet. This is the dial-up age. This is not the age of cable internet, high-speed internet. Information, access to information is still limited. People were relying on television for the most part to tell the narrative. They were relying on research that was done the old-fashioned way, mainly inside of the libraries, right?
Yeah.
And so as the age of the internet was beginning to take over, and people were more readily able to have access to, files, they began to explore declassified files, like, for example, the declassified files on Project Northwoods. Project Northwoods was a project that was proposed in the 1960s. And basically what had happened there was that Fidel Castro in 1959, he gains power. Okay?
Yes.
And he basically converts Cuba from being pro-American, Western, democratic, to a more socialist, communist, pro-communist model, right? And they were afraid about Cuba being right there next to Florida, being their neighbor, that it would pose a threat to them or allow the Russians to build a base there. And the United States deemed Cuba to be a very great threat to it. Mm-hmm. And so the generals at the time, they were trying to come up with a plan, okay, on what they shall do in order to justify a war against Cuba, or how can we remove Fidel Castro from power? Okay. And so they came up with lots of different plans, and proposals for this. One of their proposals was that they were going to send the mafia against the Cubans. And against Fidel Castro, they would have the mafia assassinate Fidel Castro. But then you have this revelation that, okay, well, obviously the U.S. government, instead of arresting the mafia, they're actually utilizing criminal organizations such as the mafia to carry out international assassinations at this high level. So they knew that the mafia was upset at Fidel Castro for shutting down all of their casinos and things and operations that they had in Cuba. And so they proposed that they manipulate the mafia and pay the mafia in order that it takes care of the dirty work of the United States. So this it makes the United States really like part of the mafia. It makes them mafia too, because they're utilizing the mafia. It makes them criminals as well. So that was something which was very controversial. Another one of their plans was that they were going to try to utilize, for example, ex-lovers of Fidel Castro to put poison in his drink in order to assassinate him. At one point, they had proposed using chemicals to alter the body of Fidel Castro, causing his hair to fall out and causing him to grow breasts in order to embarrass him on the public stage and to take away this kind of macho man image that he had. So he'd lose his mustache and his hair and all this stuff, and then he'd just be a bold man with breasts, so to speak. So there were these crazy plans, and it's quite interesting that they were talking about doing things like this in the 1960s. But I think their most controversial proposal came in the form of what we find in this project called Project Northwoods. And in it, they basically said that the US public would not support a war against Cuba, all right, just by means of us declaring that it's a threat. The world also would not support that or allow this type of aggression against an independent country, right? Because they're Cubans and now they're carving out their own destiny. It's not for another country to interfere in that. And so they wanted to kind of garner the support of the American public while, fending off the criticism from the rest of the world. So they said that the only way that we can achieve this, the only way that we would be able to invade Cuba, remove Fidel Castro, right, and put our troops on the ground over there is if we basically make a false flag operation.
Okay.
All right. And so they came out with various proposals for the false flag operation. Okay. One of them is that they would take Cubans that were friendly to the United States. So they're basically like Cuban citizens that are agents of the United States that are anti-Fidel Castro, and they would make them on camera attack a U.S. base that exists on Cuban soil, which is Guantanamo Bay. All right?
Yes.
And then they would say, oh, look, Fidel Castro and his troops are attacking us. So they would dress dissidents, Cuban dissidents, agents of the United States as Fidel's soldiers and have them launch attacks against a U.S. base. And in that stunning admission, we realized, and the American public realized, and the world realized, that the U.S. not only had the ability to lie, but it had the ability to stage events that are not true. Mm-hmm. It had the ability to actually attack its own assets. Yeah. And not only that, but they came up with proposals in the project of blowing up like U.S. Navy ships in the region.
Whoa.
And not only that, but the project proposed as well that there be a hijacking of a U.S. plane and that the plane be hijacked and then destroyed or blown up.
What?
And here's the most stunning part, is that they proposed in there that they have Cubans who are agents, right, posing as Cuban terrorists, and they would make them land on the soil in Florida and Miami, Florida, and also in Washington, and start attacking U.S. citizens in a terrorist attack in order to cause the rest of the country to rally behind the United States and justify its invasion of Cuba.
That is crazy. I mean, personally, I wasn't aware of what was in Project Northwoods when you first mentioned it. So to me, that as a US citizen, that's extremely shocking. And I think many Americans actually are still unaware of this particular declassified document. And it just makes me think, okay, this was stuff that was proposed. The door to anything is open now because that trust is broken. They have no qualms with attacking their own people in order to use it as a means to an end, which is their overall agenda. Mm-hmm. So as a US citizen, that really, I mean, that breaks my trust in the government, you know? And I'm 100% sure that it has escalated from there in the generations that have passed since that time.
Yeah, so that's the idea, right? Like, is that people, they began to think to themselves, okay, well, this is crazy. Like, what can I believe now? The U.S. government is capable of doing anything.
Yeah.
Now, the project itself was refused by John F. Kennedy. There was a bunch of generals, like 5, 6 of them, that they signed off on this project. They all wanted to go through it. They just needed the signature of the President of the United States, and then it would take place. JFK, he looked at it. He was in agreement and alignment with them that he wanted to assassinate Fidel Castro, which is illegal. He wanted to also invade Cuba, which was illegal. He just disagreed with them on the means. He was worried that this plan be exposed and he would be destroyed politically, right? And that it would be a great big scandal. Yeah. So he declined signing off on it, and it was just JFK's signature that came between this plan being implemented or not. Wow. Right? Now, this plan that wasn't implemented, it was declassified. And it makes you wonder how many classified documents still exist in the United States archives or governmental archives that hold within it secrets and lies of the U.S. government that they would never perhaps release to the public, or they'll only release to the public many years down the line when it's already too late and it doesn't matter anymore. The people began to naturally think of the events that were taking place in 9/11.
Mm-hmm. Of course.
From 1961 to 2001, we're talking about only 40 years passing.
Yeah.
Exactly 40 years. And people thought to themselves, okay, well, that's odd. They were going to do this in 1961. And here in 2001, there is actually a terrorist attack with hijacked airplanes in which many Americans die. Mm-hmm. And this justified war against Afghanistan, but also against Iraq.
Yes, exactly.
And you had one of the top military people, he had come out after that, and he had spoken about how actually during that time, there was a plan that the U.S. government had, and that was to get rid of 7 regimes, to invade 7 countries, in the years that followed that. So there was Afghanistan, Iraq, there was also Syria was mentioned. Libya was mentioned, and other countries leading all the way to Iran.
Interesting.
And we saw that after 9/11, what took place?
The Arab Spring, all these toppling of leaders.
The Arab Spring took place, the toppling of these nations.
Very interesting.
Gaddafi of Libya was removed. Sudan got divided in half, and a great war took place. Syria now, you see, has fallen. It's done. It's done for. Lebanon. Hezbollah is gone.
Whoa. Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Wow.
So people thought to themselves, and that's where the great conspiracy began to take hold, that actually maybe these guys, maybe the United States was not attacked by terrorists. People began to wonder, maybe the U.S. actually staged terrorist attacks in multiple U.S. cities against its own self, as it had proposed to do back in the 1960s, right?
Right, why wouldn't it? It had no issue doing so before.
It had no issue doing so before. Maybe they did it now. And maybe these guys were actually agents, whether they were knowing agents or unknowing agents. Maybe these so-called terrorists, had contracts with the U.S., maybe they're still alive today. In the document of Project Northwoods, there was this line in there which stated that they would also forge documents and place them at the crime site in order that it be clear that it was a Cuban agenda.
Okay.
And that really reminds us of how during 9/11, the plane crashes into the Twin Towers, and then they claim that they found a passport for one of the terrorists just laying on the ground, unburnt, untouched. And maybe we can have a picture of that here on the screen.
So there's no doubt about the motivation.
Yes, there's no doubt. It's clear that there was a terrorist attack.
That's crazy.
They also spoke about how they would falsify recordings from the hijacked plane in the Northwood project. They would falsify radio transmissions to show back then and prove that the Cubans were conspiring with one another. So they're talking about terrorist attacks. They're talking about forging evidence, forging recordings. They're talking about placing evidence at the scene, having forged documents. They were talking about how they would have passengers board these planes, right? In 1961, board the plane, but they would board the plane under fake aliases, right? Fake names, in order that nobody know that these individuals, they talked about that these individuals actually never existed. So you'd have like Tiffany boarding on the plane, you have them on camera, Tiffany on camera boarding on the plane, but she's boarding under a different name.
Okay.
Do you understand?
Yes, I understand.
And then they wrote about how they would hold mock funerals for these so-called victims, in order to convince the public that they died, but they actually didn't die.
That's all in writing.
That's all in writing. So they had different proposals in case the president wasn't convinced that they should actually carry out terrorist attacks against real people and kill them in cities in the United States. The alternative plan could be that they would have fake victims, mock victims that would board under, they'd all be agents. So it makes you question the whole thing. It makes you question everything. And people did question everything. And they wondered, are these guys really terrorists? Or were the planes actually hijacked? Did the planes actually go into the towers? Could it have happened? Can a plane even bring down a building like that? You had other people that studied the video evidence and stated that it looked like it was a controlled demolition. Experts said that it would be impossible for terrorists that were at that level of training to accurately and successfully dive these two planes into these towers, and countless documentaries and committees were created, and investigatory groups were formed in order to study the evidence post 9/11 and to cast major doubt on it. But what can you do? Yeah. What can you do?
Yeah. I mean, it's just fascinating. It's really fascinating. I think that every American citizen, if they were not previously aware of these things, it's like an obligation to look deeply into it, because the evidence is there. And, you can't put your blind trust into an entity that clearly does not care, about its relationship with the truth. It doesn't have a need to be honest with you. It is, as you said before, the boy who cried wolf.
Exactly.
Why believe it this time?
Exactly. So we're not saying today's topic is not about proving whether or not 9/11 was an inside job. Today's episode is about showing how a person who lies once and is willing to do something once, or proposes to make a lie once, will not be believed afterwards. And that's what happened post 9/11 and post Iraq war, and leading all the way through all of the other wars that the US government has been involved with since. Everybody has cast doubt on that. And they have blamed the United States, and they have also doubted every other terrorist thing that's happened since then. And so they began to, a lot of people in the Middle East, most people in the Middle East, they're seeing now, they don't believe the US narrative, and they're seeing what's taking place now as a repeat of Project Northwoods, a series of false flag operations that justified the means internationally and at home for the invasion of the US into the Middle East, in order that they eliminate the enemies of Israel from the region, in order to establish U.S.-Israeli dominance over the Middle East, and in that the people are seeing the U.S. as a real manifestation of the character of the Antichrist that was mentioned in the narrations. Because what is the Antichrist? Essentially, the Antichrist is a liar. That's what the Antichrist is. That's literally the meaning of Antichrist or Dajjal. He's a deceiver, a one-eyed deceiver, a deceiver that pretends to be one thing, but actually he's something else. And they're not buying what's going on, but a lot of people are seeing that the U.S. is trying to rally up Christians, and they're doing things that are overtly obvious. They're even you had the White House spokeswoman. She was at a conference and she was talking recently, and you had her there, and she was wearing a big shiny cross around her neck. Usually that wouldn't happen. You have had the certain people being confirmed recently into high-level cabinet positions within the administration, within government, leading the Pentagon, leading the U.S. Defense Forces, people that have giant tattoos of Christian crusader crosses on their chest. So you have this kind of rallying up of the Christian people in the United States, and the U.S. administration under lies, leading them in a holy war in the Middle East. In the apparent, it seems to be that the U.S. is doing so to protect Israel because they're preparing for the coming of Jesus Christ, right? This is essentially why the normal American man or woman that's wholesome would support this type of thing, because they believe that Jesus is coming back soon, and they're good people, real believers in Jesus Christ, and they think that it's an obligation to protect Israel from all those who hate Israel, because all those who hate Israel might also hate Jesus, and that is the Muslims. And so they want the third temple to be built, and you have this kind of Christian Zionist new era that is being formed.
It brings to mind for me that warning from Jesus to beware of wolves in sheep's clothing, because inwardly they're ravenous wolves. And it's obvious that from this warning, I think we take it lightly. We think that we're going to know, we're not going to be deceived, it's not going to be convincing, but it actually is going to be convincing. They will appear as sheep, and you're going to follow them, and you're going to think that they're docile, and you're going to think that they're your friend, but actually they're your enemy. And it's just this mind-blowing thing to think about. Like, what if we have been lied to so much that we don't even know anymore what's the truth and what's a lie?
Exactly. And I think that, that kind of makes the point of today's episode. And today's episode was to show that a person or an entity that once lies or has the intention to lie will never be trusted again. And unfortunately, it was a very big mistake, I think, for the United States to engage in such deception in the past, because now, even if they were telling the truth in anything, they would not be believed, or there would be this big shadow of doubt that would be cast over it and over its actions. And we also have, it's not just the United States, by the way, it's also all these other nations where they have rulers that were dictators and tyrants, and placed in there through false means of deception, the supremacy of man versus the supremacy of God. And that highlights also why it is that we need a leader or a ruler from God, a guide, a Mahdi, an imam, a caliph, a successor, a vicegerent, a pope who is divinely appointed by God, a Dalai Lama who's divinely appointed by God, a kalki, so to speak, that would always move forward and act in truth, always, because truthfulness is and truth is the most important virtue of all. God bless you, and thank you, Tiffany, for joining us today.
Thank you so much, Father.
Assalamu alaikum.
Wow, that was quite an episode. And in the beginning of this episode, Abu Sadiq, from him his peace, mentioned that truth is the most important virtue. And he also mentioned that his kunya is Abu Sadiq, which means the father of the truthful. And I just think that it's worth noting that in this time where the swamp of lies, this sea of lies, and all of these liars are being exposed, the one who is actually rising with the truth and exposing all of this is Abu Sadiq, the father of the truthful. And that is exactly what he is doing today and what he has dedicated his life to doing for the past decades. And the timing of that is no coincidence, that the father of the truthful, he rises in this time where he is able to expose the lies of the deceivers. And that is why we stand with him, and we stand with the father of the truthful. He is the fulfillment of God's promise.